Callista never belonged here, Rhett Horn, 38-year-old senior development consultant at Arden Grand Hotels Group and the proud son of the company's executive vice president, said into the microphone. He said it in front of 400 people. He said it with a smile. She's charming, she means well. But this company runs on ambition, and my wife, God love her, has never had a single ambitious bone in her body. Laughter moved through the ballroom like warm water. Callista Simone Arden Horn, 34 years old, controlling beneficiary of the Arden Legacy Trust and majority owner of the $900 million hotel group her late father built from the ground up, stood 12 feet from the stage in a pale gold dress and said nothing. She held a small satin evening bag against her side. Inside it, wrapped in a square of velvet, was a vintage brass room key, room 101. The first Arden Grand property, Charleston, South Carolina. Her father had worn it on a chain every working day of his life. She had brought it tonight because the company was celebrating 30 years. Because Samuel Arden had been gone for 4 of them. Because she thought someone should carry the weight of that alongside the champagne. She had not expected her husband to reach inside her bag while she was signing the guest book. She had not expected to feel the weight shift. She had not expected to look up and see Rhett already moving toward the stage, his hand inside his jacket pocket, his face wearing the particular smile of a man who believed the night was already his. What Rhett Horn did not know was this. His wife had never been simply his wife. Samuel Arden had built Arden Grand Hotels Group from one broken-down bed and breakfast in the South Carolina Low Country. He had borrowed against everything twice, hired people most hotel chains would have turned away, and designed his crest, a lighthouse over open water, on a paper napkin the night before his first property opened. By the time the company went private at a $900 million valuation, he had 43 properties across 11 states, and his name appeared in the same sentence as the Ritz-Carlton in trade publications. He also had a daughter who understood every square foot of what he had built, and who had promised him, near the end, that she would not let it be taken apart. The Arden Legacy Trust had been Samuel's last careful act. His attorneys structured it to hold controlling interest in the company quietly, with Callista named as majority beneficiary. The board knew the trust existed. A handful of senior attorneys knew its contents. No one else had been told the name of the woman behind it. Samuel's reasoning had been simple and a little sad. He had watched what happened to founders' children after the founder died. Cousins appeared with old letters. Executives reinterpreted verbal agreements. Partners of partners surfaced with paperwork that had never existed before the funeral. He wanted Callista protected from all of it, from the particular hunger that grief seemed to invite in people who had never earned anything by hand. So Callista went by Horn in public. She attended company events as Rhett's wife, not as Samuel's daughter. She let Rhett hold forth at dinner tables about Arden Grand's expansion strategy. Smiling quietly while he described plans she had already reviewed with the board, she let Crane Horn, 63, Rhett's father and Arden Grand's executive vice president of property development, lecture her at Thanksgiving about the importance of institutional knowledge, the kind that took decades to build, the kind someone could not simply marry into. She had never corrected him. She had married Rhett 6 years ago because she thought she had found something that was only hers, not the company's, not her father's legacy, not the trust attorney's careful language. A man who had looked at her across a restaurant table and asked what she actually cared about in the world. She had told him about the Low Country and the first property and the lighthouse crest and the paper napkin. He had listened the way people only listen when they are genuinely curious. She had thought that was real. She had kept her maiden name out of it for him as much as for protection. She had wanted to know whether the marriage could stand without the weight of $900 million pressing against it from the inside. Now, standing in the ballroom of the property her father had opened on his 50th birthday, the Arden Grand flagship in Atlanta, 40 stories of glass and brass and cream marble, Callista watched her husband walk to a stage built under a chandelier her father had commissioned, and she understood she had been wrong about what she was protecting. The evening had begun with the slow, poisonous beauty that always preceded something irreversible. The gala was dressed in ivory and deep teal. Centerpieces held white orchids in low crystal vases. The lighthouse crest appeared on every napkin ring, every program, every banner stretched above the stage. 200 executives, investors, property partners, and board guests moved through the room in expensive clothes, watching each other with the calibrated attention of people for whom every social occasion was also business. Callista had arrived beside Rhett, with her shoulders straight and her expression neutral. She had done this so many times it had become muscle memory, a particular stillness that allowed her to move through a room without demanding anything from it. Rhett had looked at her dress and said, "You're not wearing the emerald earrings." "I prefer these," she said. He had already turned away. Veda Caro, 36, principal of Caro Property Development and Rhett's mistress of 8 months, arrived through the guest entrance 40 minutes into the cocktail hour. She wore a dress the color of deep copper and moved through the room with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where she intended to stand by the end of the night. Her company had been pursuing a co-development agreement with Arden Grand for 2 years. The deal had stalled repeatedly because the compliance team kept flagging Caro Properties' financial reporting as incomplete. Callista had known about the stalling. She had not, until 3 weeks ago, known why Rhett kept quietly encouraging Crane to push the agreement forward from the development side. Corval Ames, 50, Arden Grand's director of internal compliance and one of the few officers who had served under Samuel Arden himself, had come to her with a folder and a careful expression. The folder held Crane Horn's approval notes on 2 accelerated vendor reviews, a pattern of internal calendar conflicts, placing Rhett and Vader at the same 3 off-site meetings, and expense reports filed under Strategic Partnership Development that included a dinner for 2 at a restaurant. Rhett had told Callista he could not attend because of a client call. She had read every page. Then she had called Imogene Rask, 47, her private attorney and legal counsel for the Arden Legacy Trust, and asked how quickly Emergency Board Authority could be prepared. Imogene had said the paperwork was already drafted. She had been watching the compliance flags for months. Callista had asked her to wait. She had not fully decided what she was waiting for. Something in her had still wanted to be wrong. Then Rhett reached into her bag. She had been at the guest book station near the entrance hall, adding her name beside Rhett's in the 30-year anniversary registry. He appeared beside her, smiled for a passing photographer, and then she felt his hand brush the clasp of her evening bag. It was quick. It was practiced. She looked at him, and he looked through her, the way people look through things they have already decided do not matter. By the time she understood what had happened, he was already moving. The brass key had belonged to her father, old enough that its edges had softened but the engraving still clean. AGH, first door. Samuel Arden had pressed it into her palm at the hospital 3 weeks before he died and said, "Keep this one close, not because it opens anything anymore, but because it reminds you what you started with." Callista had kept it in the velvet square for 4 years. She had not worn it on a chain the way he had, because she had not known how to carry grief that visibly, but she had brought it tonight because 30 years deserved the weight of the beginning. She stood at the guest book station for a long moment. She did not chase him. She did not call his name. She looked down at her bare palm where the key had been, then looked up at the stage, where her husband was adjusting the microphone. The room was already quieting. Rhett spoke well. He had always spoken well. That was part of what she had loved about him, the way language came easily, the way he could make a room lean forward. He spoke about growth and legacy and the kind of ambition that built institutions. He spoke about Crane, who had served Arden Grand for 18 years, whose development work had shaped 3 of the company's most profitable regional expansions. Crane sat at the front table with his champagne and his pride, and he did not notice the way his son's eyes kept moving toward Veda Caro. Then Rhett paused, the careful pause before the performance, and said the thing about Callista, that she was charming, that she meant well, that ambition simply was not in her nature. The room offered its polite laughter. Callista breathed slowly through it. Then Rhett reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the brass key. It caught the stage lighting the way her father's had always caught morning light, dully, warmly, like something that had earned its color. A murmur moved through the room. Not everyone knew what it was, but the older board members did, and Corval Ames, standing near the back wall, went very still. Rhett held it up with the ease of a man displaying something he had found rather than something he had stolen. 30 years deserves a symbol, he said, a beginning, a first door. He stepped down from the stage without hurrying. He walked toward Veda Caro. This belongs with the future, he said, and placed the brass key into her open hand. The room offered a confused, compliant applause. Some people thought it was planned. Veda closed her fingers around the key and smiled the smile of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Crane raised his glass. Callista looked at the closed hand holding her father's key and felt something inside her go very quiet. Not empty, not broken, but quiet the way a room goes quiet the moment before a decision becomes irreversible. She took one step forward. That key opened the first Arden Grand property, she said. Her voice was even. It carried without effort. My father wore it for 26 years. Rhett turned. Annoyance crossed his face, not guilt. Callista, he said. The word had the shape of a warning. You gave away something that wasn't yours to give, she said. It was in your bag, he said. Yes, she said, it was. The room had gone genuinely quiet. Not polite quiet, but the kind that came when people sensed they were watching something real. Crane set down his champagne. Callista looked at the key still in Vader's hand. She did not reach for it. She did not beg for it. She looked at it long enough for everyone in that ballroom to understand she knew exactly what it was and exactly what it cost. Then she turned and walked out. No shouting, no tears they could record. Only the sound of her heels crossing marble, while 400 people held their breath, and the lighthouse crest turned slowly above the stage in the air conditioning. At the back of the room, Corvell sent a message to Imogen. 4 words, she's ready, prepare everything. The Arden Grand's original property records were kept in the archive room of the Atlanta flagship's lower level, the part of the building that renovation teams had been instructed for 20 years to leave exactly as it was. It smelled like cedar and old paper, and the particular stillness of things that had been important long enough to outlast their moment. Callista sat at the long table there for 2 hours after leaving the gala. Imogen arrived at midnight with her legal case and a calm expression Callista had come to depend on. Corvell brought 3 sealed compliance folders. Nate Pullman, 58, Arden Grand's board secretary and an officer who had co-signed the original trust documents with Samuel's attorney, arrived last. He set a sealed board notice on the table and said nothing unnecessary. They opened the first folder. Crane Horn's accelerated approvals for Caro Property Development vendor access. 2 of them, both processed through a back channel in the development division, both mislabeled as standard contractor review. Second folder, expense reports. Rhett's dinners with Vader filed as due diligence. Private property tours expensed under business development. A hotel suite booked in Caro Property's name and charged to an Arden Grand client account. Third folder, internal communications. An email from Crane to the development director 3 months prior pushed the Caro co-development review forward. Rhett has a relationship there that could be useful long-term. Written 2 days after Vader Caro attended the same off-site strategy summit as Rhett. Callista read each page the way her father had taught her to read contracts, slowly, linearly, without skipping to the conclusion first. Then she picked up the pen. The authorization she signed was not angry. It was clean. Her full legal name, the way the trust required it, Callista Simone Arden Horn. Beneath that, the trust identification number. Beneath that, the emergency board convening authority her father had written into the founding documents for exactly this kind of morning. Imogen watched the ink dry. The board will have formal notice before 7 a.m., she said. Callista set down the pen and looked at the black and white photograph on the archive room wall. Samuel Arden at the Charleston Properties opening day, 30 years ago, the brass key on its chain against his work shirt, squinting into the morning sun like he hadn't slept in a week. He looked like a man who had bet everything on something that might not work, and had chosen to look happy anyway. Don't use power to punish pain, he had told her once, when she was 19 and furious about something she could no longer remember. Use it to stop the damage. She had carried that line through her wedding, through every dinner where Crane talked over her. Through every night, she read a new compliance flag and chose to wait 1 more week. She was done waiting. The lobby screens changed at 7:58 the next morning. One moment they showed a highlight reel from the gala. The speeches, the orchid centerpieces, the lighthouse crest above the ballroom. The next, every screen in the building went black. Then white letters appeared, clean and deliberate. Emergency board session, controlling Sheraton present, Arden Legacy Trust. A concierge at the main desk stopped mid-sentence. 2 executives walked out of the elevator and stood in the lobby looking at the screens without moving. A housekeeper near the corridor set down her cart. Rhett arrived at 8:05 with the unhurried energy of a man who believed the morning was already settled. He had texted Callista twice. She had not answered, which he interpreted as sulking. He had told Vader, the night before, that Callista would apologize by noon. He believed it with the full confidence of someone who had never been made to question his own red of a room. He saw the lobby screens and stopped. Crane was already there, still in the jacket from the night before. His face was hard in the way that told Rhett he was calculating, rather than confused. The private elevator at the east end of the lobby opened. Imogen stepped out first in a dark suit carrying her legal case. Corvell followed with the compliance folders, Nate Pullman came next, and then Callista walked out. She was not in the pale gold dress. She wore black, cut clean and close, her hair pulled back, her face carrying the particular calm of someone who had made a decision hours ago and was simply arriving at its consequence. On her lapel was a small pin, a lighthouse over open water, rendered in antique silver, the original Arden crest, the version Samuel had used in the first decade before the brand team softened it. The older employees saw it first. A bellman near the luggage station straightened without being asked. Hester Dunn, 62, head of housekeeping, and a woman who had worked at the Atlanta flagship since Samuel Arden personally interviewed her, pressed one hand flat against the front desk and went still. Her eyes went to the pin, then to Callista's face, and whatever she recognized there made her stand up straighter. Then she stood straighter still. Around her, one by one, the senior staff did the same. Rhett looked around the lobby, irritated. Why is everyone? Mr. Horn. Imogene's voice was pleasant and absolute. The board is convening. Please come through. Callista isn't a board member, Rhett said. Imogene looked at him with the clean patience of someone who had been waiting for exactly the wrong thing to be said. You're correct, she said. Mrs. Horn is not here as a board member. She turned slightly toward Callista. Mrs. Arden is here as the controlling shareholder. The name moved through the lobby like something physical. Crane's face changed, not all at once, in pieces, the way understanding arrived when a person had been protecting themselves from it for a long time and the protection finally ran out. Arden, Callista Arden, Samuel Arden's daughter. He looked at his daughter-in-law, the quiet woman at his Thanksgiving table, the woman he had explained institutional knowledge to, the woman whose company had been paying his salary, funding his department's expansions, and carrying his title for 18 years. And for the first time, he could not find a single word. Rhett shook his head. That's not possible. Callista stopped in front of him. She was close enough that he could see she was tired. Not broken, tired in the way that follows a decision made at midnight and not regretted by morning. It was possible, she said quietly, every time you looked past me. Then the boardroom doors opened, and she walked through them. The boardroom held 12 chairs. Every board member was already seated. Sealed folders waited at each place. Arden Grand's outside counsel, Imogen, Corval, and Nate Pullman stood at intervals around the room like the architecture of a verdict. Callista sat at the head of the table. For 6 years she had sat in rooms like this as Rhett's wife, beside him, behind him, in the chairs along the wall. She sat at the head of this one, the way water sits at the bottom of a valley, quietly, completely, and with no sense that it had arrived anywhere other than where it had always been going. The board recognized her authority. The trust documents were verified. The emergency session was confirmed. Then Corval opened the first folder. Caro Property Development. Unauthorized preferential vendor access. Accelerated approvals processed through Crane Horn's division without proper board review. Expense accounts used to conceal the nature of the relationship between Caro's principal and the development consultant who had advocated internally for the company's access. Crane sat with his jaw tight and his eyes on the table. Veda Caro, who had been brought in at Callista's instruction and still wore the brass key on a chain at her throat as she had all morning, looked at the compliance timeline and said, "This is a mischaracterization of a standard business relationship." Corval clicked to the next slide. A transcript from an internal vendor call, standard practice, disclosed to all outside parties before every line was opened. Veda's own words in print. "If Crane keeps moving this through development, we'll have the routing access we need before the Q3 board review. Rhett said he can keep it quiet until the deal is done." The room was silent. Veda's hand went to the key at her throat. "Now," Callista said. Her voice had not changed volume once since the boardroom doors had closed. "The key." Veda looked at Rhett. Rhett looked at his hands. "It was given to me," Veda said. "It was taken from my bag without my knowledge," Callista said. "It is listed in my father's personal estate inventory. It was removed from my property and transferred publicly on these premises." She paused. "Whether this becomes a formal matter depends on what happens in the next 30 seconds. Veda unclasped the chain. Her hands were not steady. The woman who had walked into the gala the night before, as though the room already belonged to her, now stood in front of a board that had just read her voice in a compliance transcript, and the distance between those two versions of the same woman was the entire length of the story. She placed the brass key on the table. Callista did not touch it. She let it sit between them. She let the room feel what it meant. Then she turned to Crane. What followed was not theatrical. It was methodical. That was what made it final. Crane Horn was suspended from all duties as Executive Vice President of Property Development, pending a full investigation into unauthorized vendor approvals, conflict of interest concealment, and misuse of departmental authority. Rhett Horn's development consultant credentials, executive access, and internal sponsorship were revoked immediately. Veda Caro and Caro Property Development were barred from all Arden Grand premises pending legal review. Every Caro-related contract in negotiation was frozen. Rhett stood halfway through the third action item. "This is about last night. This is because I embarrassed you." Callista looked at him steadily. "Last night showed me what you thought of me," she said. "These folders show me what you did inside my father's company." "Our company," Rhett said. "No," she said. The word was not loud. Never. His face fell in a way that was not anger and was not grief. It was the particular collapse of a man who had confused being allowed inside a place with owning it, who had spent 6 years walking through rooms he had never built and believed the walking itself was enough. After the session ended, Callista walked past him in the corridor. He said her name. She stopped but did not turn around. "I didn't know," he said. "About the trust, about who you actually were." She turned. Her eyes were not hard. They carried the kind of sadness that had already passed through anger and come out the other side into something quieter and more permanent. "I know you didn't," she said. "That's why I waited. I needed to see who you were when you thought I had nothing." She let that sit for a moment. "Now I know." She walked on. The brass key was cleaned and placed in a display case in the lobby of the Atlanta flagship 3 weeks later. Beside it went a photograph. Samuel Arden on opening day in Charleston, the key on its chain against his work shirt, the low country morning behind him, squinting into the sun like a man who had just won something he was afraid to name out loud. And beside the photograph, a small card, AGH, first door. This key opened the original Arden Grand property, Charleston, South Carolina, 30 years ago, returned to company history by Callista Simone Arden Horn. On the same day, Callista announced the establishment of the Samuel Arden Employee Foundation, emergency financial support for hospitality staff facing medical hardship, sudden job loss, or family crisis, seeded with the savings recovered through the Caro contract freeze. She sat in the boardroom again that afternoon to sign the charter. The board stood when she entered, the way they had started doing, quietly, without being asked. She did not ask them to stop. Hester Dunn found her afterward in the hallway outside the archive room, where Callista had gone to return the old photograph to its wall. Hester had worked for Arden Grand for 22 years. She had been in the building the morning Samuel died and had kept his office exactly as it was for 6 months before anyone asked her to change it. She stopped in the hallway and looked at Callista with the steady eyes of someone who had been holding a truth for a long time and was grateful to finally set it down. "He would have said you waited too long," Hester said. "I know," Callista said. "He also would have said you did it the right way." Callista looked at the photograph for a moment, her father's hand over his chest, the key caught in the morning light. "I did it his way," she said, "not to hurt them, to stop the damage." Outside, Atlanta moved in the afternoon heat. The Arden Grand flagship rose 40 stories above it, glass and brass and cream marble. Inside, on every floor, housekeepers and concierges and front desk staff moved through the building doing the work the building required. The work that no speech from a borrowed stage, no stolen key, and no mislabeled expense report had ever actually been. The lighthouse crest was on all of it. It had been there since the beginning. Samuel Arden had drawn it on a paper napkin because he could not afford a design firm, and because he believed that a hotel chain without a symbol had no memory, a company without memory had no loyalty, and loyalty was the only real thing that made the difference between a building and a home. Callista had understood that at 12 years old, standing beside him on the Charleston dock, watching the first crew move furniture through the front door. She had understood it at her wedding. She had understood it every evening she sat quietly at a table where someone called her empty-handed. She understood it now from the head of the table, in the chair that had always been hers, in the building her father had named after himself, and left in the end to the person who had listened. Not because she was his blood, because she was the one who had paid attention. Subscribe to Broken Promise Tales for more, and leave a word in the comments, because loyalty was never meant to look like silence.